Hello, my little chickens. Welcome to Just for Farmers. Once again, I'm with Lord Paul of the Harris. Hi, Paul.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening.
I still haven't worked out a good comeback on that. He's still doing it to me. Today, we have got, I think, what's going to be a really jovial, somewhat chirpy by Jove, session, because our expert today is the one and only Frederika Roberts. Now, Frederika is a happiness expert. Now, she's not one of these people who just went, I'm happy, let me tell everyone how to be happy. She's got a master's, she's studying a PhD, she's got her own body of research she's working on. She's doing it right, and she makes a difference in the lives of thousands of young and old people. So we thought we'd get her on, see if we can help you lot. So, hi Fred, how you doing?
I'm very well, thank you very much. And managing to bear the heat, and I don't want to complain about heat. We finally got it. So,
Yeah, at the time of recording this, it's the 1st or 2nd of August, and it's sweltering outside. So we've even got the fan on. So if that disturbs you, I'm sorry. But so to all the ADHD people are going, "What's that noise?" It's the fan in the background. so Fred, sorry, do you prefer Fred or Frederick?
yeah, Fred is absolutely fine. Thank you very much.
Okay. So Fred, give us a sort of a 90-second, 2-minute potted resume of who's Fred, where you come from, what you're doing, and why do you do it.
Okay, you're asking a person with ADHD to be succinct. That's always an interesting one.
However, that was my first big mistake. Yeah. Go on.
I'll take it as a challenge and I'll take it on. So my background is quite varied. I've worked in specialist recruitment, in the food industry, in scientific recruitment as well for quite a while. I have had my own little food production company. I've worked in social media marketing, and I've worked as a teacher, which pretty much broke me. So that's one of the reasons why a lot, but not all of the work I do on well-being is in education. Right. My sort of educational background actually started off a very long time ago with a business degree, and then eventually did a master's in applied positive psychology. And I'm, as you mentioned, currently doing research at doctoral level. It's part-time, so it's a kind of 4 to 6 year journey. So I've got a little while to go. Yeah, I've just completed my 4th year of research, looking at a change management process for whole organization improvement. And I've been applying that to a primary school for whole school well-being specifically. So I live and breathe well-being, which doesn't mean that I am always happy or chirpy. I mean, I have been told I'm a bit annoyingly cheerful at times, but that's just my personality. That's not my work. And that's not what I kind of propose that everybody else should be. But really, happiness, yes, but in the context of being well and looking after ourselves, and ideally doing a lot of the work that positive psychology allows us to do, to be preventative with our mental health in the same way that we try and be preventative with our physical health, and having habits and behaviors and little everyday things that we can all do to look after ourselves in the same way as we teach our children to wash their hands before they eat or brush their teeth at bedtime. You know, it's that kind of thing, having these little daily habits that can help us maintain our well-being and hopefully avoid problems down the line.
Now, you mentioned your demeanour is generally quite chirpy and chipper. So is there a significant difference between your day-to-day demeanour and being happy in a health and well-being context?
I think so. I think one is being cheerful and chirpy, and that can be personality. That can be, in some settings, people do it professionally as well. You know, if you work behind a reception desk, not everybody does, but you should probably put in a bit of a chirpy, welcoming persona, because you don't want to go into a hotel or any kind of other setting and have a really grumpy receptionist greeting you, although we all do quite often experience that. But being well is really more of an understanding that actually we all have emotions. We have great emotions and we have really crappy emotions, frankly. And the emotions actually come and go, they fluctuate and they're fleeting. Actually, emotions themselves, even when we're going through really difficult times, we don't have that same emotion all day, 24 hours a day. They tend to only last a few minutes and then, they change. So emotions are fleeting, they come and go, and we have a whole range of them. And actually accepting that and being able to kind of ride that and ride along with life and and knowing that we can still thrive even when we have all sorts of challenges. And I know that not just from the research, but from my own personal experience in life, that we can do. And I've met plenty of people in the course of my life that have had circumstances far worse than mine that actually are still able to thrive. Yeah. So the ability to actually accept what happens to us when we can't change it, but actually know that, that this too shall pass kind of, knowledge that things do pass and that we can move beyond. I don't like to use, even though resilience typically is talked about as bouncing back, I think we don't always go back to where we were, and that's not always necessary or helpful, but we can certainly, the phrase bounce forward has been used a lot in well-being recently.
I've heard that, if you fall forward,
and we can kind of move on. And for some people, and it's not everybody, and nobody should impose that or expect that, but for some people, actually, there is such a thing as post-traumatic growth. So, you can experience either individual or even community-wide traumatic events and grow from them and become something better than you were before. So again, that moving forward and bouncing forward. Yeah. So being well, it's very individual. And what I do is certainly not about telling people to just think positively or smile and everything will be okay, but it's actually about having those tools to help us overcome, to help us cope in a healthy way, because there are plenty of unhelpful coping mechanisms that we all use from time to time. So help us cope with challenges in a healthy way and help us then move beyond those and really make the most out of life when things are good and appreciate them and be able to enjoy them and flourish in the good times.
Well, I was interesting. You picked up on the word resilience. In my notes here, I wrote down to immediately ask you, because resilience is a word that we hear a lot about, and particularly in agriculture. You've got to be resilient in agriculture because of the ups and downs and the challenges of the weather and everything else. Yeah. So what is the link between happiness and resilience, almost, all this bounce back ability or bouncing forward that we talked about? What is the link between happiness and resilience? If you're happy, are you more resilient, or do you need to be resilient to be happy? What's the...
Isn't it, if you're happy, clap your hands?
That's the one, yes. A much better song, yes. Teaching that to my grandchildren.
I think it's a bit of both. They're very linked. And a lot of the stuff that I talk about from positive psychology, and I'm sure there'll be opportunity, I'll share some of these practical tips as well. A lot of the stuff we can do to look after our well-being and to be happier is stuff that actually makes us more resilient. So the two go very much hand in hand. Mm-hmm. And so if we are quite grounded in terms of our mental health, in terms of our well-being and how we look after ourselves, then we are better able to overcome and move past challenges, in the same way that if we take preventative measures for our physical health, we are more likely to then overcome illnesses in a better way, because we're stronger to start with, and we have those habits already. And actually, interestingly, mental health and physical health are also very closely linked. And there's been some really interesting studies, for example, where I don't know where they find these volunteers, but they measured people's well-being and happiness and how positive they were feeling, and then sprayed cold virus up their nostrils. And then looked at who got a cold, and also how quickly people recovered from it and how severe it was. Wow. And actually, those people that were in a much better place mentally before being sprayed up the nostrils with a cold virus, it's not that none of them got the cold. Of course, quite a few of them got the cold, but quite a few more than those who weren't in a good place didn't get it in the first place. And those who did tended to recover faster and also not get as badly ill with it. So it does make a real difference, actually, how we look after our mental well-being in terms of how we are physically as well. And thinking actually about the farmers that listen to this, if their physical health is affected, they literally can't work.
Interesting. So, one of the hardest things we get in agriculture is tiredness, because they work long days, long hours, depending on the time of year. A lot of farmers will be out now cutting grass, harvesting, things like that. So is there a link between, if we're feeling happier and we're more grounded mentally, we'll cope with our fatigue better as well?
Yes and no. I think if you are mentally well and you're well grounded, then you're probably feeling more energetic and noticing fatigue less, because also depression and anxiety themselves, even if we get enough sleep, can make us feel very fatigued and lethargic anyway. So there can be a symptom. Fatigue itself, even if you were getting 10 hours of sleep every night, could be a symptom of you not being well. Of course, if people are anxious, if they're stressed, if they're depressed, they're probably also not going to be sleeping very well at night. So if you've already got fewer hours of sleep because you've got to work either late into the night or early in the morning or both, and then you're not sleeping well in those hours, then that's also not going to be really helpful to you having lots of energy. By the same token, however, there is a systemic problem in that job of the farmer. If within their role they can't get enough hours sleep, then being tired doesn't allow us to be at our best, and over a period of time that will affect our physical and mental health anyway.
I've got an unusual question, and I don't know if you can answer this or not. Hopefully you can. But
I'll try.
People talk about feelings and they talk about emotions. I've heard that they are two very different things. What's your take on that?
I see them used interchangeably, and I do use feelings and emotions interchangeably. But that's quite an interesting one, actually, in terms of how emotions or feelings, whatever you want to call them, are affected by things like our behavior and also our thoughts. So I can talk a bit more about that and actually give some really good strategies for affecting those. But yeah, if there is a distinction, I'm not aware of it. I'll have to look that up after this. I've always used them interchangeably, and I tend to talk about emotions more with older children and adults and about feelings more with younger children because they understand the word feelings better than the word emotion sometimes.
Yes, yeah.
But yeah, that's the only distinction.
So tell us about some of the strategies then, because I think dealing with our feelings, dealing with our emotions, and particularly in a work context where we can get frustrated, we can get angry with people, we can have something go on at home that makes us angry when we come to work. What are some strategies that we can deal with those feelings and emotions that you talk about?
Yeah, that's a really good question and a great point to kind of start on the practical tool. So actually, what I'm going to talk about in this context is not really from positive psychology, but kind of feeds into it very nicely. It's actually coming from therapeutic context and cognitive behavioral therapy. And it's a kind of triangle between emotions, thoughts, and behaviors and how they interact with each other. So the first thing is that for a lot of people, it's a bit of a mind-blowing eye-opener when you realize that actually thoughts and emotions are not the same thing. And our language around that tends to be confusing because we often say things like, I feel blah, blah, blah. I feel that you have done this, or I feel, and actually we then think that what we're expressing is an emotion, but actually it's not. It's a thought that we're attributing to a situation. An emotion or a feeling is generally something that can be expressed in one word if we tried. So you can talk about anger, you can talk about fear, you can talk about joy, anxiety, all of those, they are feelings or emotions. And they don't happen by themselves, which when I found out about this, I was like, whoa, so they don't just happen to me. There's a thought process. Sometimes we don't know the thought process because our brain has a really clever way that it has evolved to make sure that we can function in the world. If we had to give detailed thought to absolutely everything we do, we would never be able to do anything because there just wouldn't be enough hours in the day. So we take shortcuts, and a lot of those are kind of done through automation. So an event happens, or we find ourselves in a situation, and sometimes there is a conscious thought that goes with that, and I'll give you some examples of that. But sometimes the thought isn't actually something that happens consciously. It's like a shortcut. The thought's been repeated that many times that we shortcut it and go straight to the emotion that then comes as a result. But ultimately, whether there's a shortcut or not, you have an event or situation plus a thought about it that then leads to an emotion. So actually, the first thing is if we train ourselves to maybe look at different ways and challenging some of those thoughts, then that can be a really helpful way to affect our emotions. That's not to say that we shouldn't feel emotions that are unpleasant. Sometimes they're there and they're like a big alarm bell going, you need to do something, pay attention. But sometimes we're having thoughts that lead to really negative emotions, and they're really unhelpful thoughts, either triggered by habit or by trauma sometimes. So certain situations take us straight back to that emotion. And if we can actually break it and kind of think about it. So I'll give you an example from teaching, but I can think of examples that you might be able to then adapt better as particularly, Paul, as you know, the farming industry better. I'm thinking about situations around things like, weather affecting crops, machinery breaking down, laws that change and all of that kind of stuff. But if I give you an example from my teaching days, to put it into context. So in the second school I was teaching in quite a few years ago, I was given a year 9 class. So year 9, we're talking 13-year-olds. And I think nowadays, it's been about 20 years. Nowadays, probably the worst age in terms of hormones hitting is probably a bit earlier than 13. But it was certainly always known as that is the year from hell. You know, year 9 is the year from hell. Hormones have kicked in. They're in full on hormone stress. And so I was giving this year 9 class in a school where the kids that were particularly gifted for languages would do French and German all the way through to GCSE. The ones that weren't would continue with French to GCSE, but German, they would stop having a formal curriculum in year 8, but they would still do it in year 9, but with no exam, no further outcome at the end of it, and no formal curriculum. And I was given that class. And so if you think about that triangle of thoughts, emotions, and behaviors and break that down. So having come from a very, very challenging school before I went to that school, my first thought was, year 9, that's going to be challenging already. 2, they have nothing to work towards. They have no exam, no incentive to go towards anything to do well. It's going to be hell. It's going to be absolutely hell. What am I going to do with them? And so my natural response would have been to have that thought, which then would have led to anxiety, fear, stress, and behaviors such as, being overly kind of almost aggressive towards the pupils in a way to try and stamp down that behavior before it started, going to bed late the night before, because, if you put off going to bed, then you don't wake up, as soon as you go to bed and you fall asleep, then you're waking up and it is that day and it is that class. So going to bed late was kind of a weird way of delaying that process. So all of those behaviors, which then, of course, would then result in me being more tired, more cranky, in a worse position to respond to situations. I don't know how I did this, because at that point I hadn't learned about positive psychology. I hadn't been focusing on happiness and well-being or anything. But somehow I had this thought that was quite different. And I thought, no curriculum that's set, no exams. I can do whatever I want with that class. And actually, I love languages. That's why I'm a language teacher. I love languages. What if I could just use that class to have fun with German? And maybe, I'm not, I wasn't completely deluded. They're not all going to come away from that class going, I love German, but maybe a few of them will come out and go, oh, actually, there's quite a few fun bits about this, and I've learned something interesting. And so I told them this, and I created my own curriculum for the year, and I told them that at the end of the year, they would each get a certificate of achievement from me that didn't count towards anything, but that would tell them what they'd individually learned. So it would be completely individualized to each student, what they'd learned, what they'd demonstrated they could do with the German language. And I thought we can do, music, videos, games, all sorts of stuff to just bring the language to life. And so think about how that changed my emotions then. I was excited. I was curious. I was really interested. I actually looked forward to that class because it was one where I had complete freedom to teach whatever I wanted, which teachers in the UK don't generally have. And then my behavior, well, actually, I wanted to feel energetic for that class. So I might go to bed a bit earlier. I'd come into class smiling at students because I was really genuinely looking forward to working with them in that lesson. And so as a result, actually, I'm not saying that it was the perfect class. There were still 13-year-old teenagers, but actually everything that happened was much more humorous. So the one girl that walked in with a face full of makeup every single day, and the school rules were that you weren't allowed, I'd just kind of stand at the door with a packet of baby wipes and go, come on, the rules, off you go. And then she'd come back and somehow magically have removed some of it, but still kept some of it on. And I'd go, come on, we have this every week, off you go, try again. As opposed to getting angry and then having a confrontational situation. So actually just changing that one thought can make a huge difference.
Yeah.
Right. So can I bring this into the very real context, actually? One which actually you touched on something earlier that I think you'll also have some empathy with. So thoughts, feelings, actions, or thoughts, feelings, behaviors, that sort of triangle you're talking about. One of the things I know in agriculture is people can really wind us up. We can get very irritated by someone's behaviour at work.
Not just in agriculture.
Yeah, that's everywhere. Absolutely. Yeah, true. Every business. And I'm thinking of situations where farmers will tell me, they say, this lad, this girl, can't deal with them. They're all over the place. I had someone like that before on my farm, and I don't want to have to deal with this person this way. They've got ADHD or something, they don't concentrate. And the thought is, I've had someone like that before. and therefore I'm now responding in a particular way to that particular person who may well indeed have ADHD or whatever. How do we change that thought? How do we, almost again with what you've just been saying, I can think some examples, but when I'm looking at that person who maybe has got ADHD, maybe has got some challenging behavior associated with that, how do we change our thoughts, which then eventually changes our feelings and our actions towards them?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And I think it's exactly that. It's about how do we change the thoughts? And there is a really good process we can use of kind of challenging the thoughts. So the first thing is to recognize we're having it, because some farmers might say to you, oh, I've worked with someone like that before. I know what they're like. It's going to be a nightmare. But others might not even articulate or actively think that thought. It might be almost like a shortcut. So the first thing is, so if you're working with them as a coach, you can guide them on that and kind of, what's behind this reaction you're having to this person, and try and bring that thought out. And
so, some of the grumpiest people I've ever met are the first to say, "I'm not grumpy," and they always say it in a grumpy tone. Yeah. What do you mean grumpy? I'm not grumpy.
Completely unaware of what's actually going on.
Yeah. So the first thing is being aware of it, and then you can challenge it, and you can do that quite systematically. So the first thing is to kind of look at the evidence. Be a bit of a detective and go, okay, what's the evidence for the fact that this person is going to be just like the other person that you've encountered? Have they done X, Y, and Z, and all of this? And then if they've done it, have they done it consistently? Is this just a one-off, or is this something that's happening over and over again? So you really break down that evidence, and then you kind of go, well, okay, so there might be some evidence to say that, yes, it is a similar situation. Is there any evidence to the contrary? Have they done anything that's different that might perhaps disprove that this is exactly the same situation? So you really break that down, and just the process of doing that already gets you to start thinking differently.
Finding out what's true. Yeah,
exactly. Is it true? It's something that when you look at what's happening in the world and social media and disinformation, if we apply that kind of thing to our own brain and thought processes of kind of look at the evidence, look at the source, where's this coming from? And is there something to say, yes, it is the case? And then you can say, okay, well, if there is evidence of that being true, is it always true? Or is it just occasionally true? Is this person behaving like this every single day? Or is this just an isolated or occasional event? So you can start really breaking that down as well. And then you can kind of go, well, so what? So if it is true and it's always true, then what are we going to do about it? Then it's a case of, will it matter in the long term, or is it just a problem right now that we need to deal with? And what's the impact going to be? And what's the worst possible scenario that could result from this if it carries on? If this person continues to be all over the place, they're not focused, etc. What's the worst possible scenario? Well, the worst possible scenario could be, a serious farming accident, for example, with equipment. If they're not following instructions or they're not paying attention, farming equipment is dangerous and big and can cause really serious accidents. So you could go, well, that's actually the worst possible scenario. So then you go, what's the likelihood of that worst possible scenario actually happening? Because then you can start looking at, well, what mitigations are in place actually to prevent that accident, even if this person's a bit all over the place. And then once you've done that, you've first of all interrupted that thought that leads to an immediate kind of, I can't deal with this person. And then you kind of start thinking about, okay, so practically, how can I deal with this person?
Yeah, so it's a psychology flip, isn't it?
Very different, yeah. So it's, it might be that you could actually do that whole process and find out, actually, no, there isn't a problem with this person. It's just my response. And then you can adjust that response. But it can be, yes, actually, that person is going to provide me with a lot of challenges. And then you can actually look at, what can I do to support that person? What can I do to prevent accidents? How can I work with this person in a way that's more conducive to a good working relationship? So you can actually put practical steps into place, because generally we don't live in a world where you can just sack somebody because we don't like that their brain works differently. So, it's how do we help them?
But then would you also use the word flip just then, Dave? I was thinking as well, and I'm thinking particularly of ADHD actually, is that often we will look, and this is where we blend positive psychology in with what I think you're talking about. First of all, I love the fact you said interrupt the thought process, break down that thought process. Where's it coming from? And we tend, I think, as human beings, often to look at the negative first.
Absolutely.
So we go, yeah, that person's a bit chaotic. They're not listening to my instructions. They keep forgetting what I'm doing. I ask them to do 3 things and they find a 4th to do, which wasn't even on the list. Yeah.
And they've not done the 3 I asked them to.
Absolutely. Yeah. So is there how do we use positive psychology then to say, but then can we look at that person differently? What are the positive aspects of somebody who maybe is able to multitask, you know?
Yeah.
So talk to us a little bit about, particularly specifically, the sort of the ADHD thing of well, actually, what are the positive aspects of that person? So we've broken down the negatives, and some of that might be, yeah, it's dangerous. So, but let's look at the positive. Is it possible to then flip the thought process,
Absolutely.
which then would change the feelings?
Absolutely. And I think you can do that once you've broken down that thought,
Absolutely.
because then you open up your thinking process. So there's two things. One, from my own personal experience of having ADHD, having a daughter with undiagnosed ADHD and a daughter with diagnosed autism. So quite a lot of experience of living in a family with a lot of neurodiversity, and the difference between when we didn't know and now that we know, and how we interact with each other.
Ignorance can be bliss at times.
Well, yes and no, because actually ignorance led to a lot of conflict. And now that we know, it's, I'm not saying, you know, I mean, it's never going to be entirely harmonious, particularly with two people with ADHD. And we suspect my husband's probably also autistic. So that makes some very interesting dynamics in the family, particularly when we're close together on holiday. But so the first thing is, you know, obviously it's not for anybody to tell another person, I think you're autistic or you have ADHD and you should get a diagnosis. But if you suspect, you can at least inform yourself about the condition.
Yes.
And react to that person in ways that's more likely to be helpful. So if you think the person has ADHD, the first thing is that actually I think neurodiverse people, I would say that because I'm one of them, but we're awesome. You know, we are extremely creative. We can be single-mindedly focused on something when we have an idea in our head. So use that. You know, if you have somebody working on your farm that goes off on little tangents because they find exciting projects and forget the stuff you ask them to do about, use those ideas. Use that inventiveness. Some of the best inventions in the world have come from people who are neurodiverse. And I really don't think we would have a lot of that big blue sky thinking and the stuff, you know, Dave, you talk so much about massive goals. You know, the people that really tend to go for that and to go, I don't care whether you tell me it's possible or not, they tend to be the neurodiverse people. And they tend to make it happen because they can sing, you know, autistic people are very good at single focus and point of interest, but so are ADHD people if it's something they're really interested in. And so we can have that laser focus on something and just keep going and break down all the barriers. So if you've got somebody working on your farm that has a great new idea for something, rather than go, oh, that's not what I asked them to do, go with it. Ask them to actually explore it, to present you with scenarios, with suggestions, with plans, etc. And they will love it. They will love to get engaged with that. You can also take that in terms of, you know, don't give them 3 instructions at once. They'll forget the first 2 by the time you get to the 3rd. So inform yourself about the condition and give them instructions in a way that makes sense. If I can't ask people for directions, because they start giving me directions, and they go, you go to the end of the road, you turn right, then you go to that street, you turn left, and I'm like, what? And I'll either remember the very first one or the very last one. Everything in between is just a blur of words. I cannot take it in. So break it down for them. Ask them to do one thing at a time and be very, very clear and specific about what you want them to do. And you can ask them to repeat it back to you, what you're going to do next.
The more I'm hearing you speak, Fred, the more something's formulating in my head that I'm sure as a researcher you'll probably laugh at. But this isn't a triangle. This is a circle or a cycle, because positively or negatively, your thoughts control your feelings, and your feelings control your behaviors and actions. They determine your outcomes, and your outcomes determine how you think about things. And it's either a really positive one or a grumpy one. So
it is. You're absolutely right.
with the exceptions that there will be people who are neurodiverse or have got mental or emotional health challenges. With that exception, would you say therefore most of us are choosing grumpy when we could choose happiness?
I think so. And again, it's not about saying, oh, you should just always plaster a smile on. And there are some situations that are genuinely crap. And we shouldn't ever expect anyone to feel great about that. You know, did I feel great when my daughters had cardiac arrests, when they had open heart surgery? No, I felt absolutely on the floor. Like, why again? Why is this happening again? And it's not fair, and it's horrible. And is my daughter going to survive? And I'd go into survival mode, literally. And, you know, you just kind of have to just get through that situation. However, what made the situation more bearable for me was actually applying some of those positive psychology things of going, I'm so grateful that we have the NHS, that we have doctors that can actually help them, as much as they might not be able to save her life, but at least there's something they can do to try. I'm so grateful that the ambulance arrived so quickly because it happened to be parked around the corner. We didn't, otherwise Charlie wouldn't be here. I am so grateful that we have friends and family that bring us food and clothes and all of, so you can kind of make the situation more bearable in the moment, but then also use that triangle, which you're right. It's interesting because it's talked about as a triangle because it's written as a triangle, but then you talk about actually creating positive circles or breaking negative circles. So you're absolutely right. You can create these positive circles that will then help bring you out once that situation has resolved, so that you can move on with your life and you're not stuck in that circle. So you can make it more better.
Just to cut across you, I think one of the things that's really interesting here again is this, because there's a lot of talk about toxic positivity as well, where it's just this sort of pink and fluffy and life's terrible.
Hate it.
Positively. But what I think you're talking about from a very practical sense, and that's where our farming community generally are very practical people. What we're really talking about is a level of self-awareness. It's just hearing that voice when it kicks off that says this is difficult. And sometimes the situation is difficult, absolutely. And it could be something on the farm, it could be something personal. But I think when we talk about the positive psychology element, it's first of all, as you say, it's capturing that thought. Okay, so it's going to rain tomorrow, so I can't get out in the fields, right? Now, as you catch yourself going, oh, it's going to be a terrible day tomorrow, the first stage, I think, which is really important to exaggerate to our farming community, is catch yourself first.
Absolutely, catch yourself. Very much so.
Then, rather than necessarily going into what I call toxic positivity, oh, it'll be okay, it'll be absolutely fine.
It might not.
Is actually, in a practical way, what practically can I be grateful for? What practically can I have some appreciation for? So we're actually saying, okay, that's going to give me the opportunity to spend a bit of time in the office tomorrow.
Exactly.
I can catch up with my invoices. So it's not a fluffy thing that we're talking about here. It's, I mean, in terms of the neuro pathways and all that sort of jazz, I understand that we've got to train the brain sometimes because what we've got is years and years of habitual thinking. Yeah. And we've got to catch ourselves first of all. So to me, if you can take anything away so far from what Fred said, most important thing, farmers out there,
catch that thought.
Catch yourself thinking. Yeah. Because what can also happen, is it true, that if we're in a community and farmers spend a lot of time together that all tend to moan about something, that thought process is also contagious.
Yeah,
actually,
absolutely.
We can get ourselves into, well, that person thinks it's terrible, so I start thinking. So this idea of catching our thought, first of all, to me, is the most powerful thing that we've talked about so far. Is if and actually, well, if we think of it as a triangle, I'm not sure where it is. If thought is at the top, that's the biggie. the feelings and the actions will just follow. It's like a automatic thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Although you can start there. It's interesting because you can start a positive cycle or triangle or whatever from any of those points. The easiest one is actually the behaviors.
Yes,
because you can just change your behavior, even if you still have the thought. Then you have the thought, and then the hardest is the emotion, and that's where the positive psychology comes in. So, for example, you can simply do the behavior of, okay, I will do something else in this time because I can't get out in the field. That behavior change can then lead to different thoughts and different emotions. You can impact on the emotions, but that does take a bit more work, and that wouldn't be the first one to go to, but that's where the positive psychology thing comes in. So things like practicing gratitude. And you mentioned there something about, and by the way, just so that, don't forget, just make a note somewhere. I want to come back to your question earlier about the person that you find difficulty with and looking for the positives, because there's something else from positive psychology there kind of got sidetracked.
I was actually going to come back to you myself anyway. Yeah.
But I want to talk about the positive side of that as well from a non-neurodiversity perspective, but from a positive psychology. But if we stick with this idea of, how do we then also potentially influence emotions directly? Things like gratitude. So you're absolutely right. We have to train our brain, because actually not just as individuals, but as humanity, we are programmed to look for negatives and to look for danger. It's a survival mechanism. It's evolutionary. And I know, Dave, you talk about that quite a lot, and the role of the amygdala and telling us that, we're going to die in the slightest situation. It is a perfectly normal human response, and it served us as a species to stay alive. But we don't tend to face those life-threatening situations on a daily basis. So our system still responds with the adrenaline, with the cortisol, and getting that fight, flight, or freeze response. It does all of that from an evolutionary perspective. What we can do with things like deliberately, and this is a really practical, non-fluffy thing, just every day, at the end of the day, you can either frame it as gratitude. Some people find that a bit difficult to do. What am I grateful for? So a really simple one for people who struggle with that is what went well today.
Okay. Actually, to give you some context there, when I was a kid, I worked as a chef in a country house hotel right up in the Highlands of Scotland, north of Inverness, out in the middle of nowhere. And there was only this hotel and a farm within 8 miles. And on the farm, there were two sons, and they had a flock of sheep, did a little bit of haylage, and the rest was them going out in their JCBs and doing work with diggers on other people's properties. And I said, aren't you bored? And he says, if you speak to my brother, he'll say, we spend 8 hours sitting in a greenhouse, sweating our rocks off, just doing the same thing, pulling levers all day long. He said, I've learned to actually just go, look at the trees. Look at the stream there. Look at that trout jumping in the river. And he says, we are sitting in one of the most beautiful places in our country, in a glass box, able with 360 panoramic view. And it was this thinking, he chose his thought process. That changed how he felt. That changed his outcome.
The word I use in agriculture rather than gratitude, because you're quite right, gratitude can sometimes feel a little bit, being grateful for the fact that it's raining today. I like the word appreciation.
Yeah, appreciation, absolutely.
Actually, I appreciate what I've got. And all of us, I think, listening to this, have something we can appreciate. Even when our lives are really difficult, you can't be grateful for going bankrupt or something like that, but you can appreciate something else in your life that is compensating for that. So I think this is a really powerful message that we're giving out to people here. When you think about farmers as well, I often talk to them because they'll often say, we work more hours than anybody else, nobody appreciates us, and we're the people, we're keeping the country going, and you don't know how difficult this is. And I say, well, you could think about it this way. You could either get on a train in Reading at 6 o'clock in the morning and go into London and get on a tube at 7 o'clock with thousands of people. You can then get in a stinky office in the middle of London. If you're living in London, I do apologise. Work all day, get out of that office at 4 or 5 o'clock, get back on the tube, back on the train, arrive home at 8, 9 o'clock in the evening. Or you could do the same amount of hours, but you're outside, you're in the amazing, etc., etc., etc. And I think as farmers, sometimes we don't appreciate enough what we're doing. And in terms of what we're talking about today, positive well-being, I think what we're saying is gratitude, if you want to call it that, or appreciation, is an integral part of that thought process that we need to change how we look at life.
And Paul, it doesn't even have to be about ourselves. So if there's anybody listening to this who's saying, genuinely, I've got nothing to be happy about, absolutely nothing, well, do some good for somebody else, because that induces happiness. It's like giving the perfect gift at Christmas to your loved one. That alone, surely, I'm asking the happiness expert, I'm assuming that induces happiness.
There is tons of research to back that up, absolutely. That
altruism, I know that,
altruism is absolutely conducive to well-being. And I often say in my talks, be selfishly selfless. Because I don't know if any of your listeners have watched Friends. They probably haven't got time to watch TV, but maybe some of them were young enough to watch Friends when they weren't working on a farm yet. And I remember there was an episode where there was an argument between two of the main characters, Joey and Phoebe, and they were trying to basically talk about whether you could just be selfless and generous, or whether it was always a selfish endeavor. And they were arguing about this, and then Joey was on some telethon, and they were trying to get loads of money to help people. And then Phoebe phoned into this telethon to give money. She's like, I can do this. This is just, helping other people. And then she did, and she was like, Yeah, great having done that. And, yeah, of course, it's, you cannot be good to other people without it actually making you feel good. So it's actually, it's a very strong thing. And the other two things that you've both touched on there is one, yes, absolutely, that appreciation. And Dave, what you were talking about, that farmer telling you about, the different perspective and being able to appreciate nature and all the beauty that you're sitting in. Well, that is, again, a term that, a lot of people go, ooh, but it's mindfulness, actually. It's just being in that moment and noticing what you're seeing, what you're hearing, what you're smelling, what you're feeling, and appreciating it for what it is. And that's it, and that you can do that even in bad situations of just noticing, I feel really rubbish right now.
Yeah.
And just acknowledge that and sit with that without having to go to, and what am I going to do next or whatever. Just, it's there. That's the situation. That's what I'm feeling. If you've been at work on the field all day or in your tractor and you've got lower back pain because you've been bouncing it up and down on that tractor, you can just go, okay, yeah, I feel back pain. It's just, acknowledging, noticing that moment. And that actually is really important, because well-being is not about denying the stuff that isn't great, but sometimes you just have to acknowledge it and go, that's what it is. The other side of that appreciation as well is, so you've got that mindfulness aspect of just noticing and being in the moment, which includes what we were talking about before of noticing your own thoughts. But the other side of that, bear with me. That's it. You mentioned something there, Paul, about farmers often saying to you, oh, we keep the nation fed. What would people? Well, use that then as a positive, because having meaning in your life is really, really important from a positive psychology perspective. So people think of meaning in terms of, you have to have some kind of great big light bulb moment of doing something amazing for other people. No. If you can actually turn that thought around and go, yeah, I'm feeding the nation. The country couldn't survive without farming.
True.
That is meaning. What you're doing is meaningful, and that in itself. And actually, that's something that people working in office jobs, particularly kind of quite unqualified, basic kind of office jobs, like answering the phones or anything like that, they struggle sometimes to find meaning. And you can still give them meaning by, well, you might be the only person that somebody's spoken to on the phone that day.
So I think
but that's the thing. They're feeding the nation as farmers, and that's quite a lot of meaning.
Couple of things I'd say. The meaning thing is really important. I think for our farmers listening, that I think that there's the anecdotal example, isn't there? Yeah. The guy that was interviewed who was cleaning the floor at NASA, and someone asked him, "What are you doing?" He says, "I'm putting the man on the moon." And actually, he was cleaning the floor. And I've got other examples of that. But I want to just bring it, almost in closing, back to the thing that you asked me to note down. I was going to ask you about appreciation and positivity around people again.
Yeah.
And I was going to say, or ask you really specifically, when we talked a little bit about people who've got ADHD, but just people who are different to us. How can we look at the positives of people whose personality styles might be quite different to us? So say maybe I'm more the creative side, and someone's constantly asking me for data and detail, and it just doesn't work for me. How can I get my thought process in the right place to appreciate that person's gifts, which might be different to mine?
Thank you so much for bringing that back, because I did want to come back to that. One of the biggest areas of research underpinning positive psychology is the work around character strengths. Mm-hmm. And if anybody wants to look it up, if they look at a website called viacharacter.org, that has, not only all the research, but actually gives you a bit of information about specifically, there's lots of different ways of looking at character, but the VIA is what I've worked with from a positive psychology perspective. It's been underpinned by research that happened well over 20 years ago. And the idea is that everybody has these 24 character strengths. So the research was done by Seligman and Peterson all around the world, different cultures, different age groups, different genders. And they found that these traits kept coming back as traits that people found helpful, valuable, that were traits that were encouraged in children, for example, and so on. So there are 24 of them. And for example, I would often look at those 24, and creativity is one of them. And I always used to think of creativity as being artistic. So I haven't got an artistic bone in my body. I mean, my daughters still laugh at me for a drawing of supposedly a horse that I did when I was about 6 years old that used to hang in my mum's office, and then she took home, and I think I've got it somewhere now, and it says in German, ein Pferd, a horse, because it had to be specified. You could not, with the best will in the world, ever know that was a horse. And my drawing is still at that level of my 6-year-old self. So I always used to say I'm not creative. And actually, somebody that Dave knows very well as well, it's gone back to Australia now, a good friend of mine and former business partner, Liz Wright, said, who is very artistic because she's got a fine arts degree as well. She'd say, well, of course you're creative. You create workshops, you create talks, you've written books. How can you say you're not creative? And I thought, oh yeah. So we all have those strengths, but we have them in different proportions and in different order. And so if we understand, I can come back to our own strengths and how important that is for our well-being, but thinking about that question about other people and that appreciation of people who are different to us, first of all, in a workplace, whether that's a farm or an office, if you have lots of people that have all the same strengths and all the same character traits, that's not going to be the best working environment. Actually, the best way to move things forward, to have different ideas, etc., is to have a mix of people that think differently. So that in itself is a positive, that having people who think differently to you, it stops you from being in that bubble, and you can actually find much better solutions to problems, etc., and innovations if you have people around you who think differently. The other thing is about the individual. So you can start looking at what their strengths are. I do this so much in workshops with children and with adults. And with adults, you start talking about their strengths and they don't like it, and they start talking about other people's strengths. So great, focus on that other person's strengths for now. With children, they start saying about what they're good at, playing football or this and that and the other. And most people actually go to, I'm not good at. Strengths are not about what you're good at. It's about what makes you you and what makes you awesome because you're you.
Good distinction.
So things like perseverance, things like leadership qualities, which is not the same as learning leadership skills. Are you a natural kind of leader? Is that where you go to? Spirituality for some people, zest, I love that one. It's quite high on mine, funnily enough. Curiosity, humor, love, hope, all of these are strengths, right? So you can start looking at what are that person's strengths. So if it is somebody who, for example, it has ADHD, just to briefly bring it back to the previous example, are they somebody who's very zesty? What do they bring to your farm on a day-to-day basis? Do they make the working day a bit more fun when it's a bit crappy out there and things have gone wrong?
I think it's an important distinction, Fred. Really important. It is about your character rather than a
skill. Yeah. It's not a skill, absolutely.
I'm afraid time has just swept us away. So can you tell us, if anybody wants to hear more about how to get happy, how can they get hold of Frederika Roberts?
So I have a website, happiness-speaker.com. So it's happiness-speaker.com. And all my contact details, web presence, everything is on there. So they can contact me via there. They can look at my blog on there. They can read up on various other bits. So that, if they want to find out more about what I do and take that as a starting point for other sites, they can go there.
Wonderful.
I would definitely recommend they have a look at the VIA character website to really look at the positives. They can, if they just put CBT, behaviors, thoughts, and emotions, they'll find loads of information out there on that as well, and diagrams, etc., depending on what they want to delve into.
So give us one thing that somebody should take away from this talk today out there in the farming community. If you had one tip for them to do in terms of making their well-being improve, their positive mindset improve, given the fact that this has all been about change your thoughts, change your feelings, change your actions, what would be the one thing, the one tip that you often leave at the end of the session, or you could leave us with today?
I would say, because so much of what we've talked about flows from that, just try for a week, just try it. Write down at the end of each day 3 good things about that day. So something that's gone well for you, or something you've noticed. It could be as much as it didn't rain or whatever. It was dry, but write down 3 good things. And if you can, if there's a reason why that thing went well, that's something you've contributed to, write that down as well. Try it for 7 days. That trains the brain into noticing more of the good. And that's a great starting point.
Fantastic. Fred, you've been an absolute star. Thank you for your generosity of time, your expertise, and God bless you, mate. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me.
we're going to have a really short piece from James, the Body Fix coach, something that'll help your well-being. But remember, it's advisable to speak to your doctor before you start any significant exercise regime. So once again, we're with Jimbo, James Bacon from the Body Fix coach. Movement is medicine. And today, James is going to help us with neck, because so many people say they get sore necks, trapped nerves, wake up with a stiff neck because the window's been open or they've slept funny. Or is that just me? James, what can we do to help our farming friends who have got stiff necks?
Okay, so the neck is probably one of the weakest muscles on a lot of people.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
If you're talking in terms of muscles that are strong, we tend to find that we've got stuff like the deep cervical neck flexors, which we don't often see many people with strong ones of those. So what we tend to find is over time we end up with this, what I like to call Quasimodo posture. Yeah, and you've heard of that, right, David? Or you've seen it. People are starting to get hunchbacks.
Yeah.
They're starting to lean forward through the necks. Now this is just because the spine has just gone in that kyphosis sort of position, because everything on the front here becomes really tight and short. Everything on the back becomes long and weak, right? So we can start to change a few things if you get neck pain throughout the day. I always like to start on the front of the body, the front of the neck. So on the lateral part of the front of our neck is a muscle called the scalenes. Okay, so scalenes. Okay. So these are neck extensors, okay? So if we think about placing our thumbs underneath our jawbone here, and all I want you to do is gently push your chin up to the sky with your thumbs, and at some point you should feel a stretch down here in your scalenes. I'm not forcing the head back, I'm just picking it up with my thumbs and looking up to the ceiling.
So you're lifting the head back rather than forcing it back?
Yeah, I'm just pushing it gently with my thumbs, so it should go into some extension.
Okay, so it's kind of going down from the sides of the mouth, under the jawbone.
It's all down here, yeah. So if you have a scan around your jawbone, you should find two little points under there. They are pressure points in your jawbone.
Oh yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Just going to gently... If you think about just looking gently up, and then just put a little bit of pressure with your thumbs into your jawbone, you should feel a nice stretch down the side of your neck.
It's quite sore as well, isn't it?
Yes.
Yes.
So
wow.
There you go. So you feel that stretch down your neck.
Yeah, yeah. Excellent. Give us more. Loving it.
So that's one. And then if we go the opposite way, if you think about taking your chin down to your chest.
Okay.
And I'm just going to use the weight of my hands to put them on the back of my head, onto the crown of my head. I don't want to push down.
Right.
I just want to let the weight of my hands sink down into my head a little bit. And you should feel a nice stretch down the back of your neck.
So gently rolling the head down.
Chin to chest, tuck it in. Weight of the hands on the back of the head, and we're just going to place that pressure down. If you feel like you can put a bit of stretch down onto it, a bit of push, as long as it doesn't cause any additional pain, go for it.
And of course, if anyone experiences any discomfort or high blood pressure or difficulty breathing, obviously, take it easier. Take it easier.
Don't tap yourself out.
And consult a doctor before doing any exercise.
So with those stretches, I'd probably only hold them for 10 to 15 seconds, have a little bit of a break, then go back into it. The last one we can have a look at, so down the back of our necks into our shoulders, we've got the trapezius muscle, big triangle shaped muscle. So for this one, think about taking your hand and putting it by the side of your body. And now if you think about pushing...
Palm down.
Palm down. Now if you think about just gently pushing the shoulder down,
yeah.
Take the opposite hand, and you're going to place it on that same side as the arm down. So I'm just going to grab just on the outside of my head.
So reaching over my head.
That's it, just above my ear.
Yeah.
And all I want to do from here, gently pull the ear towards the shoulder.
Whilst pushing down.
Whilst pushing down with that straight arm.
Yeah.
And there you go, you've got it. Just take it to the point where it feels a little bit uncomfortable.
Why do people laugh when they're in pain?
But it just makes you feel better, right?
Yeah.
So 10 to 15 seconds of that, and then we can try the other side.
Right.
And you probably want to repeat those 3 to 4 times on each.
Wow, who'd have thought something so simple? Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, you got that one, David?
And this gets easier the more you do it.
It does, it does.
Wow.
Last one. So this time we will take our hand, and if possible, we're going to pull it onto our lower back behind us, so with palm out towards the wall behind us.
So reach behind, put the hand in the small of the back with the palm facing outwards.
Yes. And then what we're going to do this time, again, what we're going to do with our head, we're going to look down at the opposite armpit.
So if you've got your right hand behind your back,
you're going to look down at your left
down
armpit.
to the left, right.
You're then going to take that same side arm where you're looking down at, and you're going to place that onto the outside of the head, just above the ear on the opposite side.
So again, reaching over, hand on the side of the head.
Looking at the armpit, and then I'm just going to gently push down on my head.
Oh yeah.
And you should feel a nice stretch going into that trapezius muscle.
I can also feel it in my right arm.
Yep, you can also pull the armpit that's behind your back, you can also pull the shoulder back as well a little bit.
Oh, yeah,
push it down a little bit more to make a bit more of a stretch.
Yeah, that's the puppy.
Yeah, and then you're going to hold that one for 2 hours. No, I'm not joking. Just 15 seconds.
Okay, and then repeat the other side.
That's it, arm behind the back, look down at the opposite armpit, same side arm, you're looking down, place it on the side of the head, and gently just pull down on the head. And just so you can feel that little bit of a stretch down the neck and into the shoulders.
Oh, okay. Wow, and do you recommend people do this after a hard day on the farm or before they start, or both?
There is no scientific evidence that stretching before doing some sort of physical activity has any benefits at all.
Really?
So I would suggest doing it throughout the day and then a little bit before when you finish your shift.
Hi, welcome to another drill down with Paul and myself talking about active listening. That's a phrase I've heard a lot of. I don't know if I truly understand what it means. Paul, what is active listening?
Well, active listening is a level of listening that is beyond what we would our normal level of listening. There's some research that says there's different levels of listening, from almost not listening, which is when you go, yeah, I got that, and you're not actually listening at all, right up to a level called empathetic listening, where you're actually putting yourself completely in the space of the person you're listening to, and you're shutting down your own internal chatter.
Right.
There's a scale in between. Active listening sits just below empathetic listening. So I'm actively engaged in the conversation, but I am listening at a more deeper level than just often conversational stuff. Because if you're like me, often what happens when someone's talking to us, we can get bored with what they're saying, our minds can drift off, and we suddenly find we're not listening actively. Have you ever had that situation where Liz has said to you, blah, 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 and she said, are you listening to me? Because you're not looking at her.
No.
Never happened.
No.
Never happened.
No, Liz, never.
Or that's not what I said, or that's not what I asked you to do, or you've gone upstairs and you brought something down. She says, that's not what I asked you to get. Because we're not listening actively.
Yep, been there.
So that gives you a sort of gist of what active listening really is. And in fact, the way I often, let me illustrate it a couple of times. We're going to do this completely live. I haven't pre-warned Dave. I'm going to ask you a couple of questions, Dave. I want you to give me the answer.
Okay.
I'll ask you a maths question.
Right.
First of all.
Okay. Childhood trauma coming back, start rocking in his chair nervously.
Here we go. So, a quick maths question. Divide 50 by half and add 15. What's the answer?
I guess it's wrong, 40.
Incorrect.
Okay.
I'll tell you why it's incorrect in a minute. Here's another quick question. You're a religious man.
Yep.
So anyone listening back to religious studies at school, how many animals of each species did Moses take into the ark? Do you remember? How many?
2 of each.
Incorrect. I'm sorry, that was incorrect again. I'll try one more. You're not doing very well here, Dave. One more. You've got 2 coins, which equal 30p.
Right.
30 pence, all right? Since one of those coins is not a 10p piece, what are the 2 coins?
No idea.
Stumps people. Right.
Yeah.
Let me answer the 3 questions for you. Divide 50 by a half, not in half, is what I said. 50 by a half is 0.5, plus 15 is 115. But you thought I said in half. I'll explain why in a second. I then said, how many animals of each species did Moses take into the ark?
I said 2.
If you think about it, it's none, because it was Noah. It wasn't Moses. And the last question, 2 coins with equal 30p, since one of those coins is not a 10p piece, what are the 2 coins? The answer is very straightforward, a 20p and a 10p. Since one of those coins is not a 10p piece. Right. So what was going on there? If anyone listening thinking, what's this all about? Our brains, when we're listening, filter out a lot of the filler words. It's why when you read a piece of text, if the first and last letter is correct, your brain will still fill in all the gaps. So we are making hundreds of millions of assumptions all the time in the way that people speak to us. We filter out a lot of the words.
We're trying to create order from chaos.
Absolutely. And
Yep.
active listening is when you're not, when you're absolutely listening so carefully that you can't miss something. And there's a couple of techniques actually you can do to improve your listening skills. I'll perhaps come back to those. Remind me to tell you about the echo technique.
Echo technique.
Yeah, or rapid repeat
Rapid
method.
repeat method.
Yeah, you may have heard of that.
See what I did there?
Very good. We'll come back to that in a minute, because the brain has these two sides. It has the logical side and the creative or emotional side. The difficulty when we're listening is the right-hand side of our brain is desperately trying to find more information. So we find ourselves not listening. It's why we can misunderstand what somebody said. We can mishear what someone said. So on a farm, you might have had a situation where you say, can you go and, I don't know, if it's a livestock farm or a sheep or a cow, can you go and fetch me cow 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? It needs some antibiotics. And the person returns with cow 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And you think, well, look, I told you it was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Why have you brought, no, you said 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Because there may have been noise, there may have been distractions, the person may not have been concentrating, they certainly weren't listening actively.
Right.
So that's why we can make mistakes. That's why active listening is a level of listening beyond the normal conversation. Because most of us are actually not listening. We're simply waiting to speak.
Yeah. Preparing what we're going to say as soon as the other person shuts off.
Particularly if we don't like what they're saying.
Indeed. Yes. The more heated the discussion or debate, the more we're preparing what we're going to say.
But that's a really good point. The more heated the discussion, the less listening's going on. There's more thinking about, I'm having you about this, I'm going to talk to you about this, which is why we can get mistakes on farms, why we can have misunderstandings.
So that, I suppose that's why arguments frequently lead to verbal and physical confrontation, because nobody is actively listening. They're just preparing what they're going to say to try and win their point of view.
Absolutely. And active listening even doesn't just involve your eyes.
Right.
Did you hear what I said
We
there?
said looking at each other. Yeah. Did
No.
you see what I heard?
What I said, exactly. I deliberately said, it's not only with your eyes. And people often go, what? Sorry? Hey? No, yeah, exactly. It was an interrupt program. We listen with our ears, don't we? That's what we listen. But actually, we can listen with our eyes as well. So people's body language, it's why people fall out over text. And on farms now, we use WhatsApp groups, we use text messaging, quite rightly, because it's a very efficient way of getting information about. But actually, we can fall out because there's no tonality. We can't see the person's facial expression. We can't hear sometimes, particularly on a text message, their voice. So in communication terms, there is so much more than just the words that we say, that it's not surprising that we fall out through misunderstandings.
So let's go back to what you said earlier about echo chambers.
Oh, the echo chamber, yeah. The echo technique, sorry. Yeah, we were talking about echo chambers earlier on, weren't we?
We were, yes.
So the echo technique is, if, let's just assume somebody is a bit boring, or be more positively, you're a bit tired. That's a frequent thing on farm, we feel a bit tired. And we're important that we're getting some instructions at the beginning of the day from the farm manager or the herd manager as to where I need to go, what fields I need to tend to, what I need to do. We can be a bit tired. Something called the rapid repeat technique, which is, as somebody is speaking, you repeat in your mind the words as they are saying. So if I'll demonstrate it to you.
I think that's echolalia.
Is it echolalia? Is that what it's called?
That's echolalia.
You see, you've learned something every day on this podcast. So I call it the rapid repeat technique.
I like it.
So if we try it for a second, Dave, you can do it with me.
Okay.
And if you're listening onto this or watching, just repeat the words in your head, like, and, echo, in your mind as I'm speaking.
Not out loud.
Not out loud. No.
Because you'd look
Look a bit weird. In fact, sometimes people say their lips move when they're doing this. So don't do that either, because that looks a bit weird. Right, here we go. I am listening actively to what Paul is saying, which means in this moment, my brain is not thinking about anything else. Because it wasn't, was it?
It does change what you hear and how you hear it. Yeah.
You now start to listen to every single word. Divide 50 by a half and add 15. You'd have heard it if you'd used that technique. Yeah.
To be fair, I still would have got that wrong.
Yes, quite possibly. People often do. But the point being is, so let's talk about what do you think, Dave, the benefits to listening more actively to our colleagues, to our boss, to our people who work for us? What do you think the benefits if we listened more actively?
I think one of the most underestimated benefits of active listening isn't only that it solves problems quicker, but it prevents problems. If you can only imagine if your team under yourself that you've given instructions to, they don't come back and say, "What did you say? What did you mean by that?" If you're able to communicate with them, actively listening, and a simple technique is just to say, "Can I ask you to tell me what you've just heard?" See if they can explain it back to you to clarify that they've understood. Don't assume that they've understood.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with saying, so can you just repeat that, or can you just repeat that back to me to make sure we're all clear on it? And we've talked on previous sessions about personality styles. Some personality styles struggle to listen more because they're more easily distracted. So it's a really good idea sometimes. Just check in with people. See, can you just repeat back to me what I've just said? Because it's an important number I've just given you. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Now you see I said 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Good job, we checked.
Excellent. So, Paul, any last word on active listening for today?
Listen more, make more money, be happier.
Happy cows.
Good stuff.
See you all again on another drill down.